From the days of the prophets through modern Israeli society, rebuke and criticism are the bread and butter of Jewish discourse. Many will be surprised to learn that originally, according to the Torah, rebuke and criticism are designed to overcome hatred, to overcome alienation. In the book of Vayekra, the pasuk tells us, don't hate your brother in your heart, give rebuke. The following verse in the Torah is, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love your neighbor as yourself. The book of Mishlei, of Proverbs, tells us that God rebukes those who he loves. And Mishlei also teaches, if you rebuke a wise man, he will love you. So rebuking someone is a way to get them to love you, and you do it because you love them. However, we know that the bitter reality is that generally the result of rebuke and criticism leads to a greatening of alienation and hatred between the parties. Parshat Devarim begins with Moshe giving very severe, harsh criticism and rebuke to the Jewish people. It's told that Rabbi Yakov Yitchak of Peshicha, better known as the Yid Hakodesh, every day would read a few verses from our Parsha, believing that these words of rebuke of Moshe had the power to enter the heart and cause us to change our ways. And I believe that the power of Moshe's speech in the beginning of Devarim was primarily not the content, but the style. And for Moshe, I would like to share with you 6 principles of the art of rebuke. The first principle is timing is everything. Moshe chose the time to give his critique very carefully. When you give critiques to people, when they're going down, they're already feeling hopeless. Giving them criticism is just going to make them feel less hope and ultimately lead them to despair. Moshe, he waits for a positive moment. The Torah tells us that Moshe began to speak after the victories against Og and the victories against Sichon. Things are going up, optimistic spirit, that's the time to give your rebuke. Number 2, give the critique at a time that people are open to change. Moshe waited to that moment preceding the entering of the land of Israel, of Eretz Yisrael. There's now going to be a new beginning, a new life. This is a time that people are open to change. That's when to give your critiques. And finally, Moshe's timing was perfect because the people know the sad truth that Moshe is going to die. And before death, people somehow will enable themselves to see the greatness of the people around them and maybe finally to begin to listen to them. So the first principle is timing is everything. The second principle is less is more. Moshe, very rarely, we have reports of him giving rebuke and criticism to the people. Throughout Shemot, Vayekra, Bamidbar, there's very little direct speeches and criticism of Moshe of the Jewish people. But here, so in Devarim, this is a month before he dies, we have the first major speak of critique. When you give too much criticism, it just goes in one ear and comes out the other. For the criticism to really enter the heart, you have to be careful not to overdo it. I have a friend who's an educator who, with every new group of students, he always imagines that he has 2 shots throughout the year. And he must use those shots wisely. And meaning that only twice a year he allows himself to deliver a fire and brimstone speech to his students, and he knows if it's more than that, it's just not going to have an effect. The third principle is start with criticism, but end on a positive note. And that's the structure of the book of Devarim. The first Parsha is all about Moshe's critique. The last Parsha is called V'zot HaBracha. This is the blessing. The book ends with a blessing. And this has always been a Jewish, from this has been the Jewish concept of Matchilim B'Gnai V'U'Mesayimim B'Shevach. You begin with the Gnai, the negative, but finish with the positive. Maybe we can see the connection between Americans and the American cultural and Jewish culture, that we know that in American all the movies have a happy ending, where it's said that Americans love a tragedy as long as there's a happy ending. So the Torah is big on happy endings and ending on a positive note. A fourth principle is who to critique. In who to very surprisingly, Moshe talks about the sins of the Jewish people during the desert. But what's puzzling is the people who hear that speech are not the people who did the sins. The people who sin were their parents, who have just finished a 40-year process of dying. So they could object. It's not us, it's our parents. What do you want from us? But I think the answer is, when you give critique, you're doing it in order to help, as a means for the person to change, for a means for the person to grow. Sometimes there's a correct assessment that the person is not able to change. Then by giving him critique and rebuke, you just pushing him deeper into his misery. Moshe's assessment was the generation of the Midbar. They were not able to change. That's why they had to die in the desert. The new generation, because we have hope for them, hope with them, that hope is the reason why Moshe gives them the rebuke. Because part of the hope is that they'll hear the criticism, they'll hear the rebuke, and that will help them be better people. So part of the commandment of rebuke is not giving it when you know it's not gonna bring positive results. There's a story told by Rav Yosef Tlishkin in his very beautiful book, Words That Hurt, Words That Heal, about the Vizhnitzer Rebbe that late one night in the middle of the winter, he went to visit a rich banker in his city. The banker opens the door, ushers him in. They enter the office of the banker. The banker, the study, sits down and waits patiently for the rabbi to tell him why he arrived. After a few minutes of silence, the rabbi says, "Thank you." He gets up and leaves. The banker is overwhelmed with curiosity. He runs out into the cold, cold winter night, runs after the Rebbe and says, "Why did you come to my house?" So the rabbi says, "To give you a rebuke." "But Rabbi, you didn't say anything." So the rabbi says, "Well, part of the mitzvah of giving rebuke is when you know the person's not going to listen, don't give the rebuke. And I know you're not going to listen, so to fulfill the mitzvah, I came to your house and didn't give you the rebuke." By now, the banker is overwhelmed, even more overwhelmed with curiosity and a little bit insulted. He goes, "Rabbi, how do you know I'm not going to listen to your rebuke?" "Because I know you." The banker goes, No, tell me what the rebuke is. I'm sure I'll accept it." So the rabbi tells him that there's a person who has a family that has a loan from the bank, and they haven't been meeting their payments lately. So the bank wants to take their house and leave them stranded alone in the cold, cold winter of Eastern Europe. The banker starts to explain to the rabbi, Rabbi, you don't understand. It's not my money, it's the bank's money. The rabbi looks at him sadly and goes, yes, that's what I said. I knew it. You're not gonna listen to me, and that's why I didn't want to tell you anything. By now, the banker has to prove himself right, and ultimately, as I said, Jewish stories have happy endings, and he found a way to help out that family. And the next principle is the criticism should not be. It shouldn't come from a desire to vent your frustration and anger, but rather to come from the heart to help the other person. As the saying, things that come from the heart will enter the heart. Things that come from frustration and anger will only be responded to with more frustration and more anger. But here, it's really hard to know what are truly my motivations. So I have a principle that can help us determine whether our desire to give rebuke is to vent frustrations or to really help the other person out. And the rule is as follows. If you want to give the rebuke, don't do it. If you don't want to give the rebuke, give it to him. And this point I think is very significant because people generally give rebuke when it's comfortable and not when it's hard. Comfortable is giving rebuke when you're venting anger. Comfortable is giving rebuke and criticism about a third party, telling somebody about a third party and critiquing him. And it's always a way to increase your own popularity by critiquing other people. But face to face, the people you truly love, doing that which is so difficult, for their own good, to point out some shortcomings, that's something it's much harder for us to do, and that's the place we should be giving our rebuke. Let me end with the story of the small town that hired somebody every year in the days preceding the holy days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to go throughout the town to give the people rebuke. And every year this person would pick a different topic to go and give fire and brimstone sermons to the people. But every year before Yom Kippur, the whole town would get together, and at the end of the sermon, the person would tell the following story. Once upon a time, there was a person whose son was sick with a rare skin disease. And the doctors told him that to cure his son, he must take him every day to the bathhouse. But in the town that this person lived in, there was no bathhouse. So he didn't know, how am I going to cure my son? But then he had an idea. He started going from house to house throughout the town, telling every person, every family, that he has a wonderful idea how to change the course of the history of their town. Now they're a little town like all the little towns. But if they will build a bathhouse, they will be unique. There will be tourism from all corners of the province. It'll be good for business. It'll be good for everybody. And finally, he convinced everybody that the future of their town is dependent on building a bathhouse. And the money was collected, and the bathhouse was built. And at the dedication ceremony, they asked for the person who organized it all to speak. And when he looks at all these hopeful, happy faces, he feels he has to tell them the truth. So he tells them, ladies and gentlemen, I truly hope that this bathhouse will bring good to our town. But to be honest with you, the reason I went around and drove everybody crazy about this bathhouse was because I needed this bathhouse. I needed it, but I couldn't do it all alone. Shabbat Shalom.